Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be discussing the evolution of the new Jew. Some early representations were shown in the first movie that we watched in class, which was The Merchant of Venice. It was a prime example of what anti-Semitic stereotypes looked like in film through the character Shylock, who also had very limited screen time in this film adaptation of the Shakespearean play. He was represented as all the possible negative stereotypes one could think up for a Jewish person in film. At this time, Jews were separated from the rest of society and were forced to wear red if they were to be exiting the ghetto they were confined to, showing the long history of subjugation and stereotyping faced by Jewish people. Jews were separated from society because they were blamed for all of the economic woes of the people in Venice at this time. This was our first introduction to portrayals of Jewish stereotypes, and in the film, Shylock is presented as greedy, callous, and apathetic. And at one point, after his daughter flees and converts to Christianity with one of the other characters in the film, he states, "My daughter, oh my ducats, oh my daughter," showing that he cared much more or even equated his money to the value of his daughter leaving because she stole money from him. This is just one of the examples throughout the film that show his greediness, and that is one of the most common stereotypes associated with Jewish people in film, especially in early films such as this one. I'm going to be showing a clip from this film.
Apply some surgeon, Shylock, on your charge, to stop his wounds, lest he should bleed to death.
Is it so nominated in the bond?
It is not so expressed. But what of that? 'Twould good you do so much for charity.
I cannot find it. It's not in the bond.
Through this clip, you can see that Shylock is portrayed somewhat negatively, actually very negatively, and that he is shown to be very apathetic towards the Christian man that is on trial. And because it's not stated in the bond, which he wrote, he is not going to supply a surgeon for the wounds that he was going to inflict upon this man. And in one of the articles that supplemented this film, it was stated there's little argument that he was initially written, Shylock, as a comedic figure, a comic figure, with Shakespeare's original title being The Comical History of the Merchant of Venice. But interpretations began to shift in the 18th century. So these interpretations being and the anti-Semitism present in many of the adaptations of this play. Even though it's not thought that was Shakespeare's original intention, that is definitely how it comes off in a lot of the adaptations and even in the play itself. And this was more often than not how Jews were depicted in film throughout much of history, which brings us to our next film, Exodus, with some changing narratives about what it meant to be Jewish in cinema. So this was our first introduction to the concept of the new Jew, and this title was coined in the article Screening the Birth of a Nation. And Exodus was starring Paul Newman, who was the main character, and he was presented in a way that showed Jewish resilience and essentially was a rebirth for what was formerly known as common Jewish stereotypes. He kind of dismantled that through his character in this film. He represented a new age for Jews in cinema, where they are no longer portrayed as neurotic, greedy, and spiteful, but rather strong, smart, and inspiring. Americans at the time this film was released were trying to improve their relations with the newly established nation of Israel, and this film was a chance to show that Americans and Jews were one and the same. This film was also a big source of America's attempt to assimilate Jewish people into American society. By bolstering the image of Jews in America, they hoped to gain more national support for their relations with Israel during the Cold War. By portraying Ari, the main character, with the likes of Paul Newman, people realized that they could actually like a Jewish character and that they are not worthy of insult in cinema anymore. Being Jewish was no longer seen as a weakness in this film. And because of the portrayal of Ari, a lot of depictions of Jewish people were subsequently altered and changed for a more positive future, though it was one that was somewhat assimilated to what Americans thought a Jewish American should be, as Ari had blonde hair, blue eyes. He was an attractive figure that they could use for this character to appeal to larger American audiences. And now I'm going to be showing a clip from this film as well. In this clip, you can see Ari, the one of the main characters, emerging from the water, basically, essentially a rebirth that can be imagined in cinema, literally coming out of the ocean, shirtless, as if he was brought in. This is the first time you're seeing Ari in this film, so he's coming out of the water, and he is going to be the new face of the American Jew in American cinema. And this was the case for a long time in movies, up until this next film that we're going to discuss, which was Keeping the Faith. Keeping the Faith was a way in which people were now exposed to an even more updated version of the new Jew, a cool, spunky, and attractive rabbi who hopes to add a more urban twist to stereotypical religious processions. And he was played by Ben Stiller, which was also basically an equivalent of what Paul Newman was when Exodus came out, a beloved actor who a lot of people resonated with. And this evolution from being viewed as an old world religion to now having the likes of Ben Stiller showing how young Jews were too evolving with the times. This movie also shows how Jews are embracing their own differences and those of other groups as well. This movie was inspired by the jazz singer, as was told to us in one of the articles provided with this movie. And it has a similar narrative, but faced backlash when the Jewish character performs in blackface. Keeping the Faith challenges this narrative that was now associated with Jewish people in film, by using a gospel choir during a synagogue procession, showing how Jews of today embrace other cultures and do not try to simply assimilate. So it was now cool to be a Jew. They tried to create this distinction of Jewish culture by comparing it to that with a priest, so showing their clear distinction and the dichotomy between the two religions, that Jewish people are not simply assimilated, but they're their own group of people that can also embrace the cultures of others. So breaking away from the conforming idea that was shown to us in Exodus through Paul Newman, showing that Jewish people are much more than just newly assimilated Jewish Americans. They have their own culture as well. And in the film, Ben Stiller says, we're going to give them an old world God with a new world spin, showing his idea to create much more of a new idea around the Jewish religion, that it can be urban and that it's not something that is reminiscent of an old world that people can't relate to, but rather something that people can relate to. And his love interest in the film even winds up converting to Judaism, which is a major step in films because usually it was the opposite. It was characters choosing to renounce their Judaism and become Christian. So this step in a movie was major for the Jewish community and showed that it was no longer something that people should look down upon when people identify as Jewish. Now I'm going to show a clip from this movie as well, showing how they literally showed that Ben Stiller was trying to show this idea of the new Jew through his performance.
Aggressive in the execution.
Yeah, but Ben, come on. It was working.
I know. You like to shake things up. That's good.
When it works, yeah.
But you have to appreciate the fact that a lot of people come here for a sense of continuity. It's not just the board. It's your congregation, Jake. This is Mrs. Katz likes to sing the Ein Keloheinu the way she knows it. Tradition is not old habit.
All right,
It's comforting to people.
okay, but I'm not interested in babysitting Mrs. Katz. I wanna push people to grow and expand. Otherwise, what do we do?
One thing that all these three films have in common were that they were depictions of what the Western ideal of being Jewish looked like. It had a very secular view. It was mainly representations of European Jews, and did not show a lot of disparity within the Jewish community, which brings us to our final movie, which was the Red Sea Diving Resort. This was, to me, the last representation of the new Jew in the movies that we watched during this class. And while Chris Evans' character plays on the role laid out by Ari in Exodus, the introduction of the Ethiopian Jews and their struggles open up another conversation about what being Jewish looks like in cinema. Stereotypically, especially in American films, Jews are only presented as European looking, filling them into a box suitable for Western consumption. This overlooks many different people who also identify as Jewish. The Ethiopian Jews adhered to the Torah practiced in a biblical version of Judaism and prayed in buildings similar to synagogues, but isolated from the rest of Jewry for millennia, they believed they were the last remaining Jews in the world. This was a quote from a BBC article provided with this film. And by showing there is a whole other community of Jewish people in Ethiopia, this allows people to see that their previous perceptions of what it looked like to be Jewish needs to be altered. Judaism spans much further and much deeper than previously portrayed in films, and all Jews need to be included in the discussion of widespread anti-Semitism. So finally showing that it's not only Western Jews that should be represented accurately in media, but also that any person who identifies and practices Judaism should be included in this picture, and that it should not just be the one secular view that we currently have in films. It should be a much more diverse scope of what being Jewish actually really looks like and what it should look like in our films. And I have another clip from the Red Sea Diving Resort that shows this concept very well.
Perhaps the highest. When you see your brother or your sister suffering, you must not stay silent. Do not remain still. Go to their aid. Help them.
Now, that clip showed that just how important it is to remember that there are multiple different sections within the Jewish community, and that having this diversity within this community in films is very important for especially understanding why the establishment of Israel was so important, because with the subjugation worldwide, having a place that they can call their homeland is important to all people who practice Judaism. So over time, the idea of the new Jew has evolved. Old stereotypes were blown out and then destroyed through cinema, such as the ones previously mentioned. I included The Merchant of Venice just so that you could see the way in which Jewish people were previously depicted and how that has changed over time through recent media and films. From being saviors of the European Jews after the Holocaust to urban modern depictions of synagogues, and finally showing how Judaism is not only practiced in perceived Western societies, the concept of the new Jew broke negative stereotypes and showed that Jewish people can be represented in cinema with much more depth and nuance, which broke way into the deep-seated anti-Semitism in much of society that needed to be corrected, and doing this through digestible film and media was one large step that was taken within America to try and put a stop to the anti-Semitism that was going on. However, we still see very much of it today, and it is something that is going to take much more than changing stereotypes in films. However, this is one step that was very positive and was moving in the right direction for the Jewish community and for all people in different communities. Thank you very much for listening.